and turn it over to the Latimer core team. Thank you all for being here.
Go for it, Janine. You can do all the introduction.
Okay, and then I'll hand it over to you and Kate for the presentation. Um, I'm Janine. I am a co-host, or not a co-host. I am a co-host for this Zoom meeting, but I am a co-convener with Sharon and Kate for the Latimer Core group. And we are all at the Field Museum, and today we are giving a presentation on what we've done for the last year. So I will hand it to Sharon and Kate to finish the introduction.
Hi everyone. Thanks for showing up at whatever time it is, wherever you are. The core team, Janine said, conveners Kate, Janine, Martin, myself. We have a bunch of other people who help us out, make things happen. Ellie, Marie, Yuta. We meet on a Thursday once a month at this point. So Thursday, no, Friday morning. Friday morning. Usually at this time. We'll share lots of details and stuff. But anyway, thanks for joining. Kate, you want to throw the slides up? We do have some slides. We're going to kind of breeze through them relatively quickly. We have a couple of topics that we want to kind of get some time to talk through. There are agenda notes and notes in the chat. Feel free to add your name up at the top. If you're not part of our happy group, please put your email in the attendee list and we will add you. Great to see you. There should also be a link in there to the presentation down here. So if you want to follow along in the Google Slides, it's easy for you. Please feel free to jump in. Hopefully Marie slid her slides in before we get to them. If not, we'll figure it out. All right. So if you want to back up one, Kate. There we go. You can slide. Yeah, there we go. All right. So that's McCall. As I said, in order of alphabetical stuff. Yuta, myself, Sharon, Janine, Ben, Kate, Ellie, Martin, and Marie. You want to jump forward to the next slide? We're going to do 4 things, but just to set the scene, we actually sit underneath the collections and descriptions interest group. So if you're pottering around on Tadwig and you see collections information, that's the interest group. And then we sit underneath that with a couple of task groups. So we are a maintenance group. We were ratified. A bunch of things coming down the pipe. So let's give you a quick status update. Go to the next slide for me, please, Kate. So we are currently in maintenance mode. We did ratify last year in Okinawa. We're currently sitting on our GitHub repo with about 15 open issues. Some of them are related to the topics we want to discuss later on in the presentation. And so mostly what we do is try and work through those, and then anyone's welcome to throw an issue into the repo if they have questions or pop along on a Friday and talk. We have several implementations in progress. GR Cycle that Marie's going to talk about. Disco Flanders is also using Latimer Core. We also have some stuff being done by David Shorthouse. So there are some implementations of parts of Latimer Core out in the wild. The other thing we managed to get finished completely, the French translation. Thank you, Ellie, for getting us through that. And then Victor is working on the Spanish for us. We're hoping we'll have that ready by the end of the year, if not early next year. So documentation, like I said, you can find us on the collection description interest group page, and then also the Latimer Core page. Maybe someone could throw the CD URL and the LTC URLs in the chat for folks. Our next things we want to get on with for the rest of the year. Tadwig is in Oslo, as you all know. We have a session for the collection description interest group. If you haven't submitted something there and you want to, please go ahead. We're going to try and go through in a bit more detail what the standards are, how they work, how they hang together, and try and get some movement in the collection description interest group for more things. But right now, mid sits underneath the CD interest group with us and also the research expeditions folks. So the bigger things that we have to handle, which are tied up with some of those 15 open issues, are we need to be able to handle the complexity in the standard, and Kate will talk through that a little bit more later on, and we'd love you to help us. So the next thing I'm going to do is hand it over to Marie to just talk through GeoCycle and give you an update on where that is. If we press the next button, maybe we'll see some. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is just some links to our documentation, places you can go. We've revamped and reordered things, so it should hang together a little bit more logically than it did last year. Kate, next one. This is us. This is our information. You can also find the Zoom information in the agenda. If you want to get in touch with us, please do. It'd be great to see you. Next slide. There you go, Marie. That's all you.
Hello. Yes, thank you, Sharon. And also, I have some questions to why there was a cocktail Yoda on the Zoom call information. But anyway, this will be for the end of the call, I imagine. Okay, so I'm going to present places where Latimer Core has been more or less integrated with GRCycle. And I say more or less because there are some degrees of what you can call integration, and I can go into that. So could you go to the next slide, please? So GRCycle stands for the Global Registry of Scientific Collections, and it contains information about physical collections, their content, their institutions. Also, we try to have as many historical and current codes and identifiers, not just identifiers that we mint, but also external identifiers that can be found for the institutions and collections in GRCycle. It's community curated, and in addition to that, we also connect with external sources. The most notable external source where the information comes from is Indexabiorum. We also have, when we can, when occurrences published on GBIF use the same collection and institution codes and identifiers as what we have in GRCycle, we link the occurrence records to the collections and institutions. That allows us to make some dashboards and some metrics. And GRCycle has an API access, and it's also can be integrated in all the GBIF hosted portals, like the content of GRCycle. So this is just really brief overview of what GRCycle is. It's very fast, but I'm happy to go on and on for hours if we're interested. But this is to set up the context. Next slide, please. So Latimer Core has been used in several ways in GRCycle. One way is that we worked with, Matt Woodburn and Sharon, amongst others, to map the content of GRCycle to Latimer Core. So we have an endpoint for each institution and each collection where you can access the GRCycle content as formatted in Latimer Core. So collections and institutions are available in this sort of Latimer Core JSON formats. I know we had a whole conversation about JSON versus JSON plus, but I'm not sure exactly. For us, it's just JSON right now. And this can be ideally helpful for programmatic data exchange with other systems, although I'm not aware of any other system accessing the GRCycle data in the Latimer Core format. I'm not saying that it's not done, and I'm just not sure who is doing it. Possibly would be a question for you, the community. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and there was a little sort of warning, I guess it's a warning. Um, so the caveat is that because, there are many fields in GR cycle that are not defined in Latimer core, we ended up having a number of values that became measurement of facts in Latimer core because Latimer core can accommodate measurement of facts, and so we have a number of values where you have to have measurement of facts, which means that if you want to consume the content of GR cycle in Latimer core, you need to know which measurement of facts we're using, which is, the part that's not necessarily easy to work with. Next slide, please. Okay, so in GR cycle, we also have this type of entity that we ended up calling collection descriptor groups. So if you consider in GR cycle, you have those collection entries with high-level textual description about the collections. Like this collection contains a lot of, birds from North America or something like that. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have fully digitized specimens that can become occurrence records on GBIF. And so that's like very searchable, there's a lot of fields and indexable, and this is extremely structured data. But there are a lot of in-between cases where you may have a lot more information than just the textual description of your collection, but you still don't have digitized specimens or anything to make occurrence records. You just know the larger breakdowns of your collection. Overall sort of the amount of specimens you have for each family or, by each collectors and so on. So in order to capture this in between and make some of it in searchable and indexable in GRCycle, we have made this sort of semi-structured format that we called on GRCycle the collection descriptor groups. Next slide, please. And those use so I have a slide that's hidden. I can show it if we want later, but that explains a little bit more about the format of the collection descriptor groups. But this is essentially a flat table where you can put the data that you have in. And in order to map it to something that we can recognize, you have to map it either to Darwin core or Latimer core. But since Latimer core includes Darwin core terms, it's sort of Latimer core. But it's flat. It's not the sort of JSON structure that you could have in mind. The advantage is that we have been able to use that and index the content for some of the Latimer core fields, and it gives very practical applications. So, for example, we have biome type and object classification names that are Latimer core terms-ish. I think it's a bit more complicated, but if we flatten it, we will call it terms. And that allows users to share data about their collection, and that's very practical. So, for example, algae collections, invertebrate collection, biome type is for marine, freshwater, and so on. It uses vocabularies, and it's allowing search for really practical questions that people may have, like I want all the marine algae collections in my country, and that's the idea. And any Latimer core terms can be used to model the descriptors, which is great. Not all of them are indexed, but that's mostly because we don't want to index things where there's no data. But if we have people starting sharing more information there, we would be happy to index more Latimer core terms. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, that's it. I made it short on purpose. That's good. Okay, so that's the overall sort of 2 points where we have integration of Latimer core. We also use it in training, and I can go back to that if we want, but I was told to make a 5-minute presentation, and so a 5-minute presentation it was, hopefully. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Marie. Before we jump through back to Let McCall, there is a question in the chat from Beth, I believe.
Yes, I see the question. If you have your collections in JSON format, can you import them in GRCycle? Well, it depends what's your JSON format, really, because yes, if the fields are compatible with either the Latimer core version of GRCycle or just the GRCycle field, yes, you can import them. And we also have like, you know, a lot of things we can do programmatically because we have an API.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But yeah, it has to have the equivalent fields and so on. So it's not any JSON that we can recognize, right? But yeah.
Yeah, understood. I was just thinking that like I mean, we haven't decided in our museum how granular we're going to get with our collections, but if we do get fairly granular, then that's a lot of collections. So I don't want to be sitting there in the interface
Of
typing
course.
in all of them, all of those collections. So, or having art departments do that. So, you know, if we could get it in a format that can just be imported, or you know, using an API to
Yes.
get those loaded.
Yes, you
That'd be great.
definitely can do that. Use an
Perfect.
API and also
Perfect.
format. And if it becomes, I do support for countries or institutions that want to do sort of bigger imports and they may not be that familiar with the API or things like that. I'm happy to, you just contact me and I'm happy to help you set it up or, you know, or do it if it's a one-time thing, but otherwise just help you set it up so that you can just update programmatically.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
That might be a good one. Maybe we could talk through the schema classes and try and get that, because if we could get that published, then that's something that folks could download and do that sort of stuff. Yeah. Something for the agenda for next time.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's another question, but I don't think this is for me because I don't understand it. So hopefully it's for me.
that one is a we'll hang on to that one for a hot second. If you don't mind, Paul, come back around to that one because that's definitely part of what we want to talk about a bit later on. All right, so we'll just run quickly through the Latimer core basics then, just for folks who are a little newer maybe. At its simplest, a bit like Marie said, Latimer core is a standard that describes intentionally grouped sets of objects that have something in common with each other. It's allied with Darwin core. It's the group equivalent of Darwin core for individual occurrences. Again, not going to read lots and lots of things to you, but on the LTC page that's listed there, you can find a bigger description. But basically, if you think about Darwin core as individual occurrences, Latimer core is its equivalent for groups of those occurrences, but also groups of other things. So you can talk about collections in any kind of grouped way that you need to. Next slide, please, Kate. So at its core, there are two, I'm going to call them flavors of Latimer core. You can talk about the object group, which is its primary purpose. But as we were developing it, we realized that there is an allied piece that goes with it, the organizational unit, and that's a way to group the information about the organization that holds the object groups. And we can help anyone who needs to tease apart what those two things are. But if you just want to talk about a group of objects, you go down the object group route. If you want to talk about groups of objects under an organization, then you put the organizational unit at the top. Next slide. So what we have tried to accomplish with Latimer core is to give it some kind of structure. As we went through the development of it, it became increasingly difficult to make it flat, completely flat. So we have this concept of classes. And classes basically take properties and group them together. We have three required classes. The schema, which is what we were just talking about with Marie. So for example, GR cycle would have a schema, the object group, and record level. So those are the three things that are required. And then the other groups of properties, you can see we have them grouped by class. So ecological context, geographic context, those are sort of things you just saw that Marie was talking about. But we also have some that are more geared to the organization of the collection. So, for example, storage location. So you can go one of two ways with your object groups. You can talk about them purely from the group of things you've got under your bed, or you can talk about them as groups of things you have in a big institution where you can tell us that they're on in one site as opposed to another site. Next slide, please, Kate. So within a class, we have properties. And the properties are really where we dig into describing the things that you're talking about, right? And so if you go over to the repo, then you'll see every property has its definitions. It has its your IRIs, labels, definitions. We also talk about whether a property can be repeatable or not. And so repeatedness, repeating things will come up again when we get down to that further discussion. But it's something, again, because we couldn't flatten Latimer core, we had to start thinking about these ways to repeat either classes or values within a property. Next slide, please. So, okay, if you want to talk to this one a little bit.
Sure. And this follows kind of what you were just saying, basically. As we were laying out the structure of Latimer core, as you can see in the diagram here, it has a lot of structure going on inside of it that we don't often or have not really seen in previous types of Tadwig standards. And just kind of reiterating what Sharon just said about, in order to handle when we're describing a collection, the different aspects of that collection, the taxon classes or taxon groups that might be represented within it, or within a collection, its respective like sub pieces, depending on how detailed we can or need, we want or need to get into as we're describing that. Kind of following that along, if we were trying to share this data through something like grcycall, how do we make sure that we're structuring all of those details in a way that we can even line our collection description up with somebody else's? There's a lot of structure that, as we were defining Latimer core itself, we wanted to allow for a lot of flexibility, but we also needed, because of that, we needed at least a few kind of more solid points to hang some of that structure off of. And so classes were a way that we were able to at least provide some ways of indicating these properties belong in this kind of a class grouping. And if you want to get more or less detailed about, for a given object group, all of the measurements related to it, or the other kinds of descriptions about it, we would want to make sure that the ways that people group their repeated properties follows some kind of a structure that is reusable. And so within those classes, or among the classes, we wanted to indicate which kinds of relationships between classes were sort of allowable or valid. And that's something a little bit different from, again, what other Tadwig standards have done so far. And what I mean by relationships among classes is literally just what we see here. What classes can be attached to and what other classes can be attached to the class we started from. So the to and from attachments or the ranges of those classes. And within that, that gets into some of the nitty-gritty about the data structure. And what often ends up down the line as, well, that's an implementation problem, becomes a little bit more directly a thing that we needed to address earlier on. So what we mean here when we're talking about arrays or tables is, like, if a given class is similar to a table of data, we end up with, if we're going to represent this in a tabular type of format, we would have kind of a miniature relational database going on between multiple tables. Alternatively, we could represent that in JSON using things like arrays, and within those arrays, nested like sets of information objects, things like that. But we'll come back around to that. And that was a way to handle some of that repeatability versus what we've seen before is directly within a given property. We might pipe delimit values or comma delimit in some way. And that just gets really out of hand when we're suddenly trying to, in parallel, pipe delimit a lot of different properties. Instead, we wanted to group those in a slightly more structured kind of a way here. So that's this end of things, which leads us into some shared challenges. Sharon, do you want to tackle the first?
I can take the first one. Yeah, the first one, again, I'm not going to spend as much time on the first one as Caitlin on the second one. But the first one is something that we actually have from our last working group presentation to Tadwig. We recommend the use of controlled vocabularies for a number of our properties. And I know that other standards do this too. And what we were struggling with and still struggling with is having a standardized way to document and then implement those vocabularies. So we still need this. This is still a challenge out there in the community. We haven't dug into like specifically addressing it, but I know other people and other groups have. So we would love to be involved in some of those conversations because we don't want the controlled vocabulary part of Latimer Core to run away from us. So we wanted to put this out there to remind ourselves and other people that it's still an issue that needs to be solved. So that's the how to control the vocabularies challenge. And then Kate, if you want to go to the next one, this is the biggie for us, and I'll just tee it up and then hand it over. We ratified in Okinawa, but we still have some challenges about our architecture and our IRI patterns. So Kate, over to you.
So I don't want to like bombard you with the thing we were saying a few slides ago regarding for all that standard that we've ended or structure that we've ended up with in our standard for Latimer Core. I don't want to say we've broken IRI patterns, but we are in need of some way to allow people to refer directly to terms that occur across classes. We need a way to refer to the relationships among classes, for instance. Right now, and initially, the way we had set that up comes out looking like repeated terms for things like has identifier is a way that we link the identifier class to another class. We sort of defined it as just a plain old property in the initial Latimer Core version that got ratified. But the IRI situation gets complicated for that. And that's part of what we want to discuss today with folks in terms of how do we handle standards that have structure like that, where we have relationships among classes or controlled vocabs or something different that's not the traditional kind of data standard that Tadwig has handled. And we want to make sure that we get community input on how do we handle these new kinds of structures. I guess I don't want to tee it up any more than that for discussion because I feel like I know Paul's got his question and probably some other folks have their questions. Should we open it up there?
Yeah, so some of this came up in the mids conversation, and so we can sort of carry on from there because whilst the structure that we're in need of is slightly different to what they're in need of, it's still a question of structure needing help. So I don't know if we can open it up and
go to a discussion.
Yeah.
Do folks have questions about
Yuta, Martin, anything you want to add, Ellie? Before we blow it open. Silence means nothing, apparently. So
people are processing. It's too difficult.
No, we have to talk about it. John, I see your hand up. Do we want to address Paul's question? Can somebody address that? I'm going to say that's one of those techie questions that's way above my head.
So
Um,
we had our guy that did that departed from the group late. We went back to school. So we had a person, Matt Woodburn was spearheading that, and then he had to leave Latimer Core late during the expert review, I think, somewhere in that. And so we've not picked that back up. So I'm not sure.
we're digging into it though, and in terms of, I think I'm afraid of these words, but shackles and shapes are some of the ways that we could represent what are the valid relationships among classes. The thing that we're missing if we do that though is a place for those RDF types of definitions to kind of live in a persistent kind of a IRI. If it's not IRIs, but like whatever is an appropriate place for that kind of definition for a standard to live is something that we're kind of looking for.
I think in the beginning of the Latimer Core exercise, we tried to play around with Wikibase to try and test this out. There is still a very old one alive, but it's not containing the latest version of the standard. So if people are interested to have this kind of playground, we can try to look into it again and try to set it up again. But for the moment, it's a bit outdated.
Does that answer your question, Paul? If you're still around. Hopefully, yes, because I want to jump over to John. Go ahead, John.
I'm wondering maybe if it would be better to answer Yassine's question first, because what I will have to say may explode and take up 4 more hours.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. We're more than happy to help. If you can, like I said in the chat, if you can jump into one of our calls, that we're more than happy to while away some time and help you out with that. If you wanted to give us a heads up, if you haven't already, throw an issue into the GitHub repo. We can start thinking about it. More than happy to help.
Is this those monthly meetings
Yeah.
that you are having on second Friday or something?
That's right. So the next one would be, what's the next one? Let me pull up a calendar. Be more organized than me.
I saw the document.
The next one would be June the 12th. Is that too far away for you?
No, that works. I will reach out to you guys. I will let you know when we are joining. I will bring my team.
Oh yeah, absolutely. More the merrier.
Thank you.
By the way, nice work on getting FishNet updated, by the way, if you're on that program. It's good.
All right. All right, John, go for it. Blow the wind
Okay.
off.
A couple of prefaces. First preface is that I haven't paid any attention to Latimer Core up until the issues started hitting rs.tadwig.org. So that is one caveat. The second is that I have no interest in being critical. I have interest only in being helpful. So that's where everything I'm about to say is coming from.
We love you.
So in the opening slides, there was a likeness, a comparison between Darwin Core and Latimer Core. So Latimer Core is to object groups what Darwin Core is to occurrences, was the statement. And I understand that at a very broad and conceptual level, but in terms of what the standard seems to be trying to do, they're different. Or they were different until we started doing Darwin Core data package stuff. And the difference is that Latimer Core doesn't just have a base layer of a bag of terms. It jumps straight to structure. So if you look at the list of terms documents, if you look at the quick reference guides, they come with constraints. Constraints that don't exist in Darwin Core as a bag of terms. And in my opinion, that's where the crisis comes from. Of
Absolutely.
IRI term definitions, resolutions, of what happens on rs.tadwig.org, the whole bag comes from jumping at structure directly. So there's some discussion about not having structured standards in Tadwig before, but that's not true. There is ABCD, which is a schema directly. It is the structure with the terms defined in it. So you're kind of like that, but you're kind of trying to follow Darwin Core, but not. So there's an identity crisis there. Another example, it's not a Tadwig standard, but it's a standard supported by Tadwig, is CamTrap DP. Again, it's not a bag of terms at all. It's a structure with term definitions included in it. The difference and the reason you have a crisis, I think, is that you're trying to do things on rs.tadwig.org with the bag of terms that you don't have because you have structure. So you have terms in context, and that's the problem. They get repeated and they're slightly different in context. So if you accept those observations, then I think there are two possible solutions to the dilemma. One is forget the bag of terms and create a schema. Another is go back to a pure bag of terms or define that layer the same way it's done with Darwin Core. So you won't have repeatable terms. You'll have one definition for a term, and the context comes in at a different layer, as in Darwin Core DP. So we can do Darwin Core DP just fine with Darwin Core as a bag of terms where everything, even though it was repeated in the schemas, is defined once and resolves in a very specific way that is already built into all of the standards of Tadwig. And then have your Latimer Core schema as a different product that's part of the standard that uses the terms in the Latimer Core bag of terms and all of the things that it borrows. So if you do it the same way we've solved this problem in the past, I think all the problems that are on the table go away. The question is, do you want to?
So I'm going to go back to your original options that you gave us. All right.
Mhm.
So circling all the way back to, and I can only do the conceptual bits. I'm going to let the others dig into the details, right? So when I said Latimer core to object groups as Darwin core to occurrences, it's talking about the fact that we didn't create new terms for things that Darwin core had already described quite happily. We're talking about the same things. You came in at the detail end and we're like, okay, not everybody's got the detail. So we're talking about the same things, right? We're just talking about them at a grouped level before you individuate and go all the way down to the end of the part. So that's the extra piece and why we tip our hat to Darwin Core, because Darwin Core is talking about at a very detailed level the things that we're trying to talk about at a group level. So hopefully that clarifies that piece. We're not conceptually talking about the fact that Darwin Core was a bag of terms. So if we step all the way back to that part of the history of it, back in St. Petersburg, I believe, Darwin Core got pulled from ratification because it was too complicated, because it had structure in it. So if our choices are flatten it and then do stuff, or just acknowledge that there is structure in the standards that's required, I'm not going to speak for the rest of the maintenance group, but our start point, I believe, is let's just embrace the fact that actually the standards that we need to describe our data are complicated, just like Darwin Core is now doing, and start there. And rather than jumping back to a stage that Darwin Core's already acknowledged it isn't completely where it wants to be. So if that is our choice, I think we're choosing to start with structure. And because the standards that are going to come along afterwards and that are already emerging require the structure. And I think the community is now at a place where it understands that better than it did back in St. Petersburg, where its brain just got blown by the fact that people were trying to ABCD, because ABCD and Darwin Core came up for ratification at the same point. And I remember because I was new and I said, oh my God, it's too complicated, I don't understand, make it flat, which we had to do to bring the community along. So I'm going to choose your option to start with structure and let's make it good going forward. If Martin, Kate, Janine, is that what we think?
Yeah, I think we've struggled with how to define a schema, and I think we desperately want to do something in that direction. Again, if those words rub anybody the wrong way, please yell.
Safe space. We're all good.
Yeah. It's been a struggle to figure that out, so it'd be awesome to figure that out. And along the Camtrap DP lines too, like we've looked frequently at that one, and I know folks, and I think Yuta and Matt and a lot of folks had done a lot of ABCD, SCOS and or SSS, lots of SS OM mappings, to whatever extent that helps line us up with going in that structure direction. But yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
I have my hand up, but I want to make sure that you all had the chance to respond to what I said so far.
Martin, words. I see you smiling.
I think I just acknowledge I'm agreeing that we want to keep the structure, because if we gonna throw away the structure, I mean we end up in the Wild West. So I think in this case for collections we need the structure.
Yuta, go ahead.
Well, I'm for structure, definitely. And since I'm not hearing, or we are not hearing any vetoes around, I have the feeling that's not, yeah, that's at this point might be acceptable, or people are starting to wrap their hands around, like you said, Sharon. I think thinking about going forward is, for me, is do like we are starting out with, at least in the Latimer core group, we are starting out with thinking about structure, and we aren't quite sure actually what that means. Are we actually talking, when we say structure or semantics or ontology, like all the big words, are we actually understanding the same things when we say these things? Or yeah, linked data is another one. So what does it actually mean? And what do different solutions then mean down the line? So that I would find really interesting to explore. Marie.
Thanks.
I have a question though, because for GRCycle, I use also Latimer Core as a bag of terms, right? For those flat tables I mentioned. So if the structure is defined in the standard, does it mean that I cannot do that anymore? Or how
No, you can absolutely do that. It's about then you documenting the schema, because one of the things we were trying to do was say if an implementation has a structure that works for it, then that structure can get a definition that can be published and people can reuse that. Whether it's a simple one with that's relatively flat, that's fine. What we struggled with was when we needed complex structure with no way of defining it.
Okay.
Yeah, and just if it helps to tack onto that, since Marie, you'd been working out like the JSON LD and JSON, I'll mix all the flavors of JSON, but some of them, in order to help you define those specs, it's a little bit on us, right, to like give you the like baseline bits of that.
Yeah.
You don't want to go into the weeds of like, there are a lot of flavors for us to define that in. And I know when Sarah Vincent was working really hard on like what is the appropriate way to define like ranges in those JSON schemas. And we almost got there, but kind of put it
Yeah,
on
right now. Yeah.
when delivering. Like it needed a place to live, and we didn't know where that place would be. And so
Right.
then, yeah, it has been helping us too on trying to find that. But
Yeah, actually, that would be really helpful because right now the sort of like current Latimer core export is not, it's like our best guess, right? Like, but it
Right.
makes it difficult for others to ingest that, I assume. Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, this other thing, the collection descriptor is not, it's really not just flat, right? So yeah. Okay. But thanks. That sounds good to me.
Go ahead, Paul.
So we've been struggling with my audible. I don't think I'm audible. Hang on.
Yes, yes, I hear you.
Okay, good. We've been struggling with very much the same kind of issues in the biodiversity data quality standard. And the bag of terms and structure and how much constraint to put on the structure how. So our approach has been to essentially define a bag of terms that are a set of classes and a set of object properties and data type properties. And then define those within an OWL ontology, which has a little bit of constraint, a few specified ranges, but very little actual formal logical constraints in OWL. And we're really coming off the late Bob Morris's thinking there that you got to be really careful with domains and ranges in OWL because they don't do what you expect them to do. Yeah. Particularly for those of us coming out of a world working with database schemas and database constraints. It's OWL operates quite differently. So what we have done to say constraints on this structure, we've only specified in text, in normative text in the documentation of the standard. We haven't actually provided any formal machine readable way of saying these are the expected constraints on how these classes and properties go together. We looked fairly recently at shapes and shapes constraint language, and I think we're sort of vaguely thinking maybe that's a good future step, but we haven't gone that way. So essentially, we went a step further than Darwin Core has thus far in specifying an OWL ontology that provides the mechanism for putting structure on the bag of terms, but we've done very little to actually formally, in a machine readable way, say how that structure is constrained.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's really helpful to hear. I think one of the things that I certainly struggle with is with the way that things happen, and it's part and parcel of a good thing is that Tadwig very much encourages communities to come together to define the standards that they think they require, and generally those of us who are on the more collection side of it, more domain that kind of domain, we don't really have the words to talk through this piece, and so we kind of craft a standard in the best way that we can, and then submit it, and hopefully that we get to this point where more technical brains can help take it to the next level. It's hard for me as a ex-Antarctic marine biologist to really get all of the details, but I'm lucky I have the Martins and the Kates, and so this is a really good place. I think it's a really good time for Tadwig to help all of the standards that are sitting in the bucket to come up with a single way to handle these different structures and complexity, so that whoever comes along next can just bolt into it. So I think this is great. I really appreciate the Johns and all of you techie people helping us out get through this, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Go ahead, John.
Okay, so I made some notes. I realize we're time constrained here, but if these can at least get on the table, maybe it will help take us forward. So first thing is, I'm not suggesting anything counter to structure. And it seems like it's a given, what has been said here, that structure is required. There seems to be conflation between flat versus structured and the bag of terms concept. So I don't know, this maybe comes from the Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide being the place that people look for Darwin Core. But if you look carefully at the Quick Reference Guide, it's not flat either. It's got measurements and facts, and it's got resource relationships on there. That's stuff that can't be flat, period. So there's a whole document about simple Darwin Core, which is if you need flat, you use what we call simple Darwin Core, and that means you can't use measurements or facts, and you can't use resource relationships. However, the Quick Reference Guide does represent the bag of terms. On it is every term used in the Darwin Core namespace, plus all the terms that are borrowed from other namespaces to be used in Darwin Core contexts as a recognition that we expect you to need this stuff too, even though we don't define it in Darwin Core. So that's what I mean by the bag of terms. If you look at the Darwin Core Quick Reference Guide and just make a list of every term that's on there, that's the bag of terms. And the bag of terms has no structural constraints in it whatsoever. I think Latimer Core needs that. It went too far in providing structure without providing the pure bag of terms. So if you back off, keep your structure, keep the ideas, keep all the schema that you want, but to solve your problems of being able to resolve terms, etc., create the bag of terms, one per term. Then, with what you've done already, define as part of the standard what the schemas are that are part of the standard. So here, I would have to ask the question, how do you expect Latimer Core-based data to be shared? When you made this, what were you imagining? Are you sharing JSON documents? Are you sharing CSV files? Are you any of the above? RDF? Do you want to solve all the ways of sharing information about object groups? Or do you have a specific implementation in mind?
Hey, I have to go. I have a meeting. John, you're right. I just want to say that.
So what I'm
That's
going to
totally
do,
true. Before I go, that's splitting the schema from the terms, dude. Yeah, that's good, man. But I got to go. But thanks, everybody. Thanks,
yeah.
John.
So with 3 minutes to go, we have the recording. What I'm gonna give you a chance, you to just real quick, but I want to wrap up real quick and give us a next step. Before, because we're not going to answer that question right now in 3 minutes. So I know that Ben, as the chair of TAG, has put out some dates and times for a bunch of people to get together to talk through this some more. I think that's a really good place for us to now take this question, because I think, like Ben said, you're right, and we can spend some more time talking through it. But I'd really like to invite the data quality people, the mids people, because it's not just us that's in this spot for one reason or another. So if that's okay, John, we will put that question in our agenda for June. And if you're free, we'll invite you to kind of help us talk through that. That would be really, really helpful. But then we'll also talk about it at the next, whatever that tag group time that comes together. You're on the tag, right, John?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be our next steps with that. Yuta, real quick, go for it. Say what you were going to say.
No, it's leading us down the road.
Okay, put it on the agenda for June, and we'll. So we have 3 things. We'll
One
hopefully
extra
get some
question for that agenda, just to keep in mind, is just how do we best define those schemas? Since we did try and struggled a lot with that, so
right,
having guidance on that helps.
Yeah, we can bring those to the table and show what we had done and where we got to, and take it from there.
Do you already have the answer to the question about how you expect to share data?
2 possible ones, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Cool. All right, so I know we got really deep into the weeds. Thank you for everyone for hanging in there with us while we went through that. It's going to be really important for us to do this leading up to Oslo. For those of you who had questions that the more how do I use it for my collection? Thank you for those. Again, June 12th is when we meet. I'd love to see you something into our repo. We can start talking with you between now and then. I'm going to hand it back to Erica to close us out.
This is an awesome session. Thank you to the Latimer core team for leading, and for everyone who came and participated. And we will get the recordings posted, I think, sometime in the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, have great days.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.